I must admit, this one I failed at pretty hard and went, yeah, this is what pushed me kind of to the point where I was like, I don't want to play this game anymore. Like this is like okay, I've got enough of this now. Like I've done Bartzilla, I've done Bud Stream, I've seen enough.
It's time to go home.
Yeah, this is what killed it for me.
Greetings, Stonecutters, and welcome to Memory Card Lane, the nostalgia show brought to your eyes and ears by the First Aid Spray podcast and our wonderful backers over at Patreon. You can support the show for as little as $1 a month, and additional tiers offer access to early and bonus content just like this. To find out more, visit patreon.com/FASpraypod. In this episode, we try our damnedest to wake up from Bart's Nightmare. I'm your host, Jordan Sugru, and joining me for this breakdown in more ways than one, it's Steve Valance and Sherwin Matthews. How you both doing? What have you been up to?
Hello there!
I was about to say, this is the bit where it always goes wrong, when you don't say a specific name, so we both wait for a moment to be British, and then don't know what to do. And then immediately suddenly go, okay, the other guy's not speaking, and now I'll speak, and we both do it on top of each other. Steve.
Okay, put me on the spot, why don't you? I have been recovering from COVID, so send me all of your sympathy, internet. Otherwise, I've been pretty decent. I've been watching the Resident Evil Netflix series. There is a podcast about that on the main First Aid Spray stuff. Plug. But more importantly, I've been playing Power Wash Simulator, and it's so cathartically relaxing when your brain is half mush to be able to play a game that is not Bart's Nightmare. More on that later.
Yeah, I'm alright. I've not been watching the Resident Evil Netflix show, which is why I'm so good. I finally got around to playing Horizon Forbidden West, which is why this Sherwin comes to you with about 2 hours sleep in the last at least fortnight. Because that game has a nasty habit of me going, it's at 12 o'clock at night. I can just go do this one very simple chore, and then I'll go to bed. And then 3 hours later, the game says, right, now you can save, which is fun. But otherwise, I'm trying to work out whether I want to buy 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim or not. Whichever if either of you have played it, I'd appreciate your reviews. Otherwise, might be going blind on it.
Oh, what kind of game is it? I have no merry idea.
No, me either.
Good. I'll go blind and I'll let you know how it works out. Anyway, on to Bart's Nightmare, I guess. No, wait, Jordan, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I have most recently been on Tear Death Experience for the first time. We covered over the save room themes. I would think that it was mostly civil, although it got a little bit gritty towards the end, in a surprising way. Ooh, being so mysterious. What's he on about? Go listen to it to check it out. So, I guess there is nothing left but to actually get into what we're talking about here, Bart's Nightmare. AKA The Simpsons, AKA we're covering a Simpsons game on the podcast. Do we need to introduce The Simpsons as a show? I guess, but it is one of the biggest shows in existence, and it's been around for how many years now? 33 years or so?
Oh god, really?
Yes, Steve and I are both immediately feeling very, very old.
Were you late bloomers with this show, or was it the same thing where it just entered your life when you were about 3 or 4?
Let's pretend 3 or 4 was the age.
Yeah. For me, it was... I watched it on VHS first. We had like a VHS set for, I want to say, bits and pieces of season 1. Probably not all of it, because it's like about 1 billion episodes in an American season. Then we got Sky 1, when we finally got Sky, and Steve would not stop watching the effing Simpsons to the point where I was actually told to go watch it in the other room more than once. So yeah, it was a thing that I annoyed my family with when I was younger. Been a big fan, but honestly, I've kind of, ever since the big movie came out, I kind of fell off. And I hear that the modern seasons are quote-unquote cack, and I haven't really been bothered to play catch-up with Bart, Homer, Marge, Lisa, or Maggie, and find out for myself. So was a fan, not particularly hate The Simpsons, but have drifted and lapsed, would be my take.
How about you, Sherwin?
Let's see. So many years ago, I think I probably would have had some limited interaction with it back in the day when it was on Sky. But I really remember it from being that thing that was on. Was it on BBC Two?
That's
around
right.
6 o'clock.
Yes.
Around the time that we would sit down at the dinner table and just vegetate in front of a TV. But yeah, I think it's one of those shows where, much like Friends, or Big Bang Theory is getting there dangerously so as well, if not already, where it's just kind of perpetually part of the cultural landscape now, isn't it? It's just that thing that's always been around. Or Star Trek, it's just kind of consistently been there. People don't understand what the world is like without it. It's just there. And it's one of those things where you can just pick up an episode of The Simpsons and just watch it and have a pretty good gist of what's going on, even if you've not seen anything else around it. I've never been a massive fan, but it's just there.
You could probably find maybe one or two people who just haven't really watched it, but I think just about everybody's at least watched an episode or two. And for most people, it's going to be maybe an episode or, 100. Obviously, most of the success sort of came in those early seasons. People obviously talk a lot about what the golden age was for The Simpsons. Some people argue it was from season 1 to 10, or some people narrow it down to season 3 to 9. Some people narrow it down even further to something like 4 to 7.
It's just season 5. Nothing more, nothing less. Nothing else arbitrary.
It's just that one episode of Mr. Sparkle, that's it. I do not catch up with it. I maybe watch, if it happens to be on, maybe I'll catch a couple of minutes. But I don't necessarily hate, New Simpsons. I think it's almost been through so many different seasons that I'm sure there's going to be some good stuff there. It's just, I haven't really necessarily got around to watching it. But one channel that I do follow near religiously, because it is a great channel, is The Real Jim's, and he is a massive Simpsons fan. And he does review a lot of the latest episodes from the new seasons. Does actually go out of his way to, offer some defense for some of the highlights that you can find, not only through the new episodes of The Simpsons, but also stuff over the last 20 years. So if people are kind of feeling a little bit jaded about the show, there's something there.
I'm pretty sure even now, wherever we are, maybe outside of North Korea, we are within 50 meters of some Simpsons memorabilia or something else. There's always some merchandise. This is one of those heavily commercialized cultural touchstone things.
I imagine it's something like the Seinfeld effect, where at any given time on this planet somewhere, The Simpsons is showing on television channels somewhere.
Genuinely.
At any given time.
Genuinely. In fact, it's 8:38 as we're currently recording this. So if there is a Sky 1+1 still, it's showing The Simpsons right now.
Where is The Simpsons in public consciousness at this point? Is this after the initial explosion of popularity that it had? Is this after it's been kicking around for a bit and it's kind of starting to just become that thing that's on TV at 6 o'clock every night? Or is this thing where's the Bartman in this particular equation and so forth?
This is kind of post-Simpsons Mania. If we were going to sort of gauge what Simpsons Mania was as sort of the brand new thing and the craze, then this is actually post-Simpsons Mania, which kind of seems weird because it's only a few years into the show and it is already that ingrained that it's not that it's not special anymore, it's just that it is a fixture now. So I would probably say that the Simpsons Mania happened right around 1990. That's when you had things like, Do the Bartman as a music video, and you had that initial sort of burst, The Simpsons being its own show, having its own seasons and everything like that. But now we're at season 4, so it's pretty well embedded into the routine. So Bart's Nightmare released on the 12th of October 1992 and was developed by Sculptured Software, a developer heavily involved in licensed titles for LJN and Acclaim especially. The early 90s was a bit of a boom period for Simpsons titles. There was already 7 games on the market before this one came out. So, Bart's Nightmare was my first ever Simpsons game, but how about you guys?
My first Simpsons game was something called Krusty's Super Funhouse, which was like a tortured puzzle platformer of literally Krusty killing rats with his various cronies and Simpsons. I'm not even sure if anyone but Bart appears in it. Maybe Marge. And they operate torture devices to kill rats, which I'm making sound really more Saw-like and interesting, but no, it was dog poo.
Wait, so it's just Krusty killing rats?
Yeah, he basically lures. Well, it's I want to say something like Lemmings, but the goal is to kill them, not let them get through the level.
What I love about this is that you can describe some of these early Simpsons games to people who may have never heard of them, and you genuinely, it could be you've made it up. Because the concepts are always so weird. You just said that, and I was just kind of usually it would be kind of no, you're having me on. But now I'm just kind of yeah, they probably did, didn't they? That was probably at the top of their list. They said, right, we've got the Simpsons license, what are we going to do with it? crusty rat snuff film? Yeah, do that. Let's go for that.
The pure decadence and like opulence to call it Krusty's Super Fun House and not the Simpsons Krusty's Super Fun House.
And what platform was this on?
I was thinking about playing it on the SNES. Oh, sorry, the SNES to not me.
Wow. Wow. I mean, was that a good game somehow?
No.
Okay.
No, it was not a good game. Like, and spoilers, I played this and Virtual Bart before, although I can distinctly say I've not beaten any of them.
Wow. How about you, Sherwin? Have you played any other Simpsons games?
The arcade game, a long while ago, and what was the name of the one with the glasses where you can see the aliens attached to their heads?
Okay.
The point being
versus the Space Mutants.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, okay.
But,
yeah, there was a lot of focus on Bart in the early days. Bart's Nightmare, Virtual Bart, Bart versus the Space Mutants,
I kind of guess basically what happened is that, whoever worked out, okay, we have a shithole license here, it's Bart Simpson, it's the Simpsons, whatever, and then basically just farmed it out for as much as they could to sell to America. It's kind of a case of just spin it out, don't really care what the thing is, as long as it's got the Simpsons on it, it will sell and make us a whole bunch of dollar.
Absolutely. And I mean, the box arts always look good. That was the one thing that you could say about any of these games, is that the box arts always look nice because it was, at least from what I can tell, all official artwork, like done probably in-house with the Simpsons team. So you always looked at the game and you said, hey, that's pretty interesting. It's kind of a bit like the Simpsons comic in the same kind of way. There's a certain level of legitimacy because it actually looks like the show. And it's only when you actually turn on the game that it's a little bit different. But, for a bit of a change, let's talk about the one good thing about Bart's Nightmare as we get into it, and that is what I think is actually the presentation. It's probably the most palatable thing, would you agree?
You see, I can imagine seeing this in my mind's eye through a CRT, and obviously the frame rate is going to be a little bit less than like the 24 frames or whatever it would have been for the show. But everything is recognisably what it should be, even down to like the smokestacks having that really rubbish atomic symbol on them in like the Bartzilla stages, so they know how to get the visual style of the Simpsons and not just the characters across. But in the more raw pixelated form I've had to go through it kind of diminished the returns a bit.
Generally it looks alright, but it's obviously it's not perfect, is it? Because there's lots of parts of the visuals that actually affect the gameplay, like, stuff in the foreground that's obscuring you, or bullets that are too small and camouflage for you to really kind of pick out. What do you think of the visual showing?
The thing that works really, really well for The Simpsons is it's a very easy art style to, very low fidelity art style to kind of replicate and follow and copy. And it's almost made for this era of video games, isn't it? It's like the sort of thing where it can do it without too much effort or too much challenge. Do you know what? It's not necessarily visual presentation, but in terms of theme and other stuff, like, it didn't feel like, I remember playing Bart and Space Mutants, if that be what the game is called, which I think sounds about right, and just feeling entirely kind of, this isn't The Simpsons, what's this? Whereas this game at least feels like The Simpsons, and some of that is going to be the art style of it, some of that is care of detail in terms of who some of the characters are and their appearances, that sort of stuff, some of the references, so yeah.
What about sound? I mean, I actually think there's a couple of funky tunes in this, but again, it's one of those things that it's not like it's, out of this world in how great it is, but at least compared to how it plays, still sounds alright, doesn't it?
In comparison to its contemporaries at the time, like especially on the Super Nintendo system, it's a bit hit and miss for me. Like, at least the main overworld level, if you want to call it that, it has like allusions to the main Simpsons, even if it isn't quite the same. The Bartman level especially is just like a soul-crushing drone for me. I'm just surprised at how some of the stages don't even have music though.
Yeah, my big takeaway is that, again, the stuff that's there doesn't feel jarringly crap, but what is very striking is some levels they just seem to have forgot to put the music into.
I don't think Bartzilla has one, and I don't think Indiana Jones and the Bloodstream one. So that's obviously, out of the 5 mini games, there are 3 that are missing music. Although I give the Bloodstream one a little bit of a pass because you have what is that nuclear mascot.
Smiling Joe Fishing, and he goes, "Hello there!" every time he's on screen.
Yeah, that might be why they didn't include any music, because they had to use all of that data so that you could hear a really bit-crushed Smiling Joe Fishing go, "Hello! Hello!"
over and bloody over again.
Every 25, 30 seconds or so. Yeah, I think most of the music is not necessarily going to be that standout. I mean, they're not exactly channeling Alf Clausen or Danny Elfman here. There's nothing that's really going to say, oh, that's music I hear on The Simpsons, with, exception to, as you say, Steve, the main theme of the hub, which is known as Windy World, can you believe it? And there's a little bit of a motif there. It's the tiniest little thing. It's just the da 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 da. It's literally the "We're the Simpsons" part of the theme tune. But other than that, it's just this kind of slightly sort of trippy, percussional, I don't know, funky early 90s minimal funk song. I don't know what it is, but I liked it.
Vaporwave, before Vaporwave was a thing.
It's catchy. I actually quite like it. I feel like I'm kind of like a sucker for this kind of music, but it's something in the early 90s, there were just these weird songs like that which focused more on percussional and bass, and it's just a lot of plucking, and I don't know, I heard it in old adverts and old shows. I don't know what it is. I don't know what genre that is. But if anybody knows what I'm talking about, or where I can find more of it, please let me know. Otherwise, the music's not so great. But what about sound effects? Because, I mean, they're a completely different kettle of fish. They're sort of all over the place. And to be fair, most of the sound effects that you're going to hear are actually going to be of Bart. He's got different levels of recognizability. You know, he's got the kind of, the actual voice clips that they use for whenever Bart's, just woke up. If he's finished the nightmare and hasn't got the right grade or something like that, or if he ever finds a page, or if you actually do beat the game. He does have his own particular voice clip for that as well, and they're largely recognizable.
Isn't Bart doing his own version of like the Simpsons theme picking a page, or am I misremembering, where he like goes da 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 da, or like
he does something?
Is that like is that like the McDonald's theme you just did?
It is intellectually distinct from the McDonald's theme. Is what my client was trying to do there. There's also obviously the other Bart's sound effects in this game, which is the sound when he jumps. I mean, I'm still sort of in two minds about whether that's just the sound of air around him moving when he jumps, or it's actually Bart making a sound when he jumps. Whatever it is, it's weird, because it's like and it just kind of sounds like one of those groan tubes when you shake it. You know what a groan tube is? Like, you turn it upside down, it's like and then you start shaking it, and it just sounds like Bart Simpson jumping up and down. And again, like, if you're going to actually try and seriously play this, you're going to hear that at least 500 times.
I mean, SNES game with bit-crushed sound samples aside, at least there's an attempt has been made. I mean, the only other game I can think of, besides like Jurassic Park 2, is like Mortal Kombat and things like that, and most of the sound effects in Mortal Kombat are like, oh, or fatality. Annoying and stupid as it is of a boy going, oh, at least there's an attempt. I too make the sound of a slide whistle when I jump.
It's like, I remember playing an old Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle game on the Game Boy, where Cowabunga sounded like, and then pizza, yeah, exactly, and pizza time was, and that's literally it. And you kind of sat there for, you should have just used text. Like, there's no reason this was always going to be terrible, and it's exactly the same here. Like, if you can't do it to a degree where actually someone listens and go, that's cool, then don't do it. It's literally just that, because it kind of, for considering that the actual art style feels kind of like The Simpsons, and we'll get onto other bits and pieces, like, it doesn't feel horrifically bad as a Simpsons game. This part does feel poor, and yeah, at that stage, just don't do it. Do you know the best part, that you can tell how much my co-hosts enjoyed this game, that they've given every possible opportunity to talk about anything but this game. Like, first of all, it's a discussion of what The Simpsons was and how much of a big fan it was. Then it's a discussion of, hey, what have you been up to recently? It's all delaying tactics, so they don't actually have to talk about playing this game.
Oh, goodness. We can't hold it off any longer, can we? We're going to talk about the game, aren't
How
we?
many pages did you get? I want to know. Cards on your table, guys. How many pages did you get? Did you finish your homework?
You first, Steve.
I did not finish my homework. I got a D+. I got 3 pages.
Very good. How about you, Sharon?
Same here.
8 pages.
You 100%ed this.
8 pages, and I think 8+? I did it. You know why I did it? Because I had to. Do you know why I had to? Because this is my pick. Over 25 years ago, I used to rent this game. Basically, I picked this up from the Blockbuster not too far away from where I lived. And I took it home, and I was so utterly confused by what I was playing. I didn't understand it at all. I rented that game so many times. And I'm serious. I never got to a single minigame. But seriously, this game has kind of haunted me because I really should have gotten a bit further than I did. It was pathetic. And so I felt that I had to beat it this time to get it done, because I really don't want to cover it or think about it or certainly play it ever again.
So we're hunting demons. We're hunting a personal demon tonight, is what you're saying.
Exactly. This is my Excalibur. I'm getting it out of my system. But that was my first experience, where I was just stuck on the very first screen in the main hub, and I just couldn't get anywhere.
In fairness, without a manual at that age, I can totally see why. The first stage is like an abstract hell of things flying at you over and over and over again.
This is the game. This is the game that needs a manual. I have felt that for most game design and game development, games are produced in such a way that you really can sort of feel your way through most of it. But this is so cryptic, and it was even cryptic when I came back to it this time. But what were your first experiences with it? Did you grow up with it at all, or is this year your fresh experience with it?
Do you know, I genuinely thought I hadn't played this. Right up until I played the Bloodstream part, and then went, no, I do have some vague recollection. So at some point I played this, but had just blocked it out of my consciousness for whatever reason. Yeah, I couldn't tell you when I played it. I mean, I'm guessing it obviously must have been around the time it came out, because I wouldn't have emulated it or anything, so I must have borrowed it from a friend or played it at someone's house or something or other. But yeah, I couldn't say outside of that. Like, the only time I've qualitatively played it that I can really speak of is literally for this show. So, do you know what? I actually quite like this game.
Okay. Did you like it straight away?
Do you know, the problem with this game, and there are issues with what this game is. I feel like I need to justify them all at once rather than waiting for the relevant section, because this is the point of drawing the line in the sand and stepping beyond it.
Okay.
And looking back at you guys in the rear view, kind of giving me the finger. If you look at the small details, you have Jeremiah Springfield's head. There's so many small nods that clearly this has been made by someone who actually knows what the game is, if that makes sense. Like the characters that appear, in terms of the way they appear, the small references here and there. Like, someone who made this game clearly knows The Simpsons. It isn't like a sort of, a quick cash grab kind of, oh, just put this thing on it and put a random head to with it here, or take Bart Simpson and throw him into this universe that doesn't make any sense for the sake of doing it. Like, the initial concepting part, that's good. And I remember, and initial thoughts were, as soon as I switch it on, start playing, I'm like, actually that does make sense. Like, these are small little bits and pieces. I'm like, okay, this is all good. This feels like there's enough small references here to The Simpsons that I get it. It all feels very unworldy. Fantastic. And then actually playing through it, I realise, okay, I actually quite like the concept of what this is. Kind of, you have your main stage, you wander around, find your page, then switch to an A and B or whatever, and get thrown into, as you say, a mini game, which you then play through. Which again, because of the references in it, still feels unworldy. The Simpsons theme is what's really, not the music, actually the actual Simpsons theme is in the characters, is what's really tying this thing together and making it cohesive, even though they are quite disparately, different. And I think that carries it really, really well. So I was extremely impressed by just how cohesive the whole package felt based on that, considering that you'd already led me in with this will be an absolute car crash kind of intro. Bearing in mind I'd forgotten everything about it until I played the Bart's Bloodstream part. I was pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed a lot of what this game was, like in terms of how they put it together, some of the concepts and everything else, and how actually quite engaging in a strange way it did. Now, I must qualify this. I kind of played 2-3 pages and then went, you know what? I don't have a lot of bandwidth. This feels about right for where I want. I've lost a few lives anyway. This feels about right for where I want to stop playing, so I have an idea of what this game is, and I'll quickly find a YouTube video to see the rest of it in, to kind of check out some of the other stuff. Watching that, I immediately realised where some of the frustration points are going. For example, like the wandering around for hours, and what feels like hours trying to find that last page, for example, to appear on the pavement or whatever else, that sort of stuff. But yeah, some of the ideas, especially also with the, it's worth pointing out with the health bar with the Zeds going along, that's really smart. There's lots of stuff in this game where actually I look at it and go, this is kind of cool, I quite like this.
No, I mean, I do agree with you in some respects, that there is actually a lot of thought that goes into this game, but the actual execution and the sort of the end user experience, when you're first picking this up, especially if you're really not informed about it, you obviously you don't get any kind of information from the game itself. It can be really frustrating, and for myself, obviously as a kid, I just couldn't understand it. I couldn't understand what I was doing wrong. I knew how to play platformers, I knew how to walk around and jump and stuff, but I could never figure out which of the enemy, like which things were enemies and which things were actually good for me. It was hard to grasp. So, Steve, was your first experience as positive as Sherwin's?
Oddly enough, it's very similar to your own. Like, I remember playing this as a kid, rental. Me and my brother playing through, or attempt to play through it, and I'm sure we just must have got Virtual Bart one time and then this the other time, because they are very similar, except one's a bit more Mode 7 heavy. Yeah, so they kind of blended together in my memory. It was only when getting to the Bloodstream level, oddly enough, that I realised the distinction between the two games. That and the hub world is very different. Younger me didn't have too much of a bad time playing it, but we never got very far. I feel like I've never seen a true conclusion of the game. I think it is just a case of just higher grades as you get more pages. Like I said, there wasn't anything too deep, but there is a strangeness of, a core memory when I started playing it for this. So that's my story. I played it when we rented it when I was younger. It's not
well, I'm glad that you could take something from it, because I did anticipate this was going to be a bit of a train wreck episode, because Bart's Nightmare is not a game that I would typically recommend, unless you just have a slight sort of need, some kind of curiosity for how bad this could be. Here's the thing, it's not a bad game, it's just an incredibly cryptic game and quite punishing. It doesn't really hold anything back where it concerns sort of fairness, and it's one of those games that I would say you can't actually beat blind. I think you have to lose a few lives at the very least to start understanding what the game's doing. But at this point, there were a lot of games that were already transferring a lot of their information to the game itself to actually tell you what the controls are and what you're doing. And obviously this game changes those rules up a lot throughout the game. But there's there's different segments, obviously, to the way that this game is built up. To start with the story, the briefest of stories that it is. Bart's up late doing homework when he falls asleep at the desk, and all his pages are blown out the window. So as you do, Bart leaps out of his window to retrieve them and lands in this game's hub world, an evergreen terrace-looking assault course known as Windy World. So the objective is simple enough. You just walk around till you find a page. The problem is actually getting to a page in one piece, because for what is effectively a single suburban street, you're fending off 10 plus enemy types and hazards. And they're all unique. Some you can defeat, some you can't. Some you need items against that you only get from killing other enemies. Some will curse you, others will uncurse you. Unless, of course, you're already uncursed, in which case they hurt you. The health bar shrinks for reasons just too baffling to go into. Don't even get me started on how you find the health. And you're doing all of this just so you can survive long enough to find that page that randomly shows up. It could be 30 seconds, it could be 20 minutes. It'll show up when it feels like it. When you do find a page, you get to play an equally hard, equally cryptic minigame, which if you fail, earns you nothing, as you're thrown back to Windy World to start it all over again. What is this?
It's madman's dream logic, Jordan. It's totally...
I am the madman.
It's a nightmare.
I have become madman.
So what you're saying is your least favourite minigame is, in fact, Windy World? Or am I going crazy?
I think it's the most baffling one. Again, I don't think this is a bad game. Usually when people talk about bad games, they're talking about, shoddily made games that sort of had that kind of unfinished code. There'd be weird glitches, or you'd have something like the E.T. game where it's just it's really limited, or Superman 64, where again you just can't get through the first stage. Everything works if you know how it works. But the way that it works is so confusing. And that's just what, made me scratch my head as I was trying to play this game. I would love to talk to the developers of this game because I just want to understand what their approach to the game design was. Because bear in mind, this wasn't their first game. They worked on plenty of stuff. But why did they make this in particular so obtuse? Because... I don't know. It's not like anything I've come across. Have you ever come across a game this cryptic, but still have a certain degree of thoughtful design, at least in terms of games design? Right?
I mean, realistically, this game feels like the earliest iteration of the concept of WarioWare. Only, obviously, there is a small caveat to that. WarioWare tells you what you're going to do, what the objectives are, and they're normally small, short things. This feels like if you take the concept of a WarioWare level or challenge and expand it from the 5 to 10 seconds it may be to 30 seconds or 60 seconds or in some god-awful things 5-10 minutes and still no actual guiding through line, no controls, for example, or objectives being pointed out to you besides find the page Bart, which may or may not be clear at all. Yeah, it feels like very much that kind of mini-game collection gone to the weirdest possible paths and branches in development. It could have been a lot smaller, could have been honed. Obviously, I am leaning a bit in my own personal biases that, of what WarioWare is, and it's a mini-game challenge selection, but that's also abstract and fairly crazy and sometimes operates on dream logic as well. Any rational sense to my compatriots.
Absolutely. There's loads of minigame compilations that are out there, and I mean this concept does work in sort of principle. I mean, Sherwin, would you say that if you were to release this game today, would there be that many things that you would need to change about it? And what in particular would you change about it to try and make it a bit more sort of palatable? Because the idea of actually collecting pages and playing minigames and slowly doing it, that could be a fun little arcade experience. But how can we make it a bit more upfront accessible and a bit more sort of legible, in terms of gameplay?
I think design-wise, this game is it's a little bit ahead of its time. It's very much got some really wild, fun concepts. I can imagine some creatives sitting down and going, oh my god, right, here's what we could do. Health bar, let's do this. Let's break it up to little mini worlds where you're going around doing this and this. And, there's the super fan in the room going, yeah, that's really cool. And let's make sure you've got Jebediah Springfield's head and, Blinky's in there and we can do this and this. And these are all the things. The problem comes from the execution. And that's where the game falls down. It is crap sound effects. It is some stages missing music. It is the grind that as you get through more pages, it all feels like complete random town and when you're going to find another one. It's almost to the point where that's the issue, and perhaps some of that is literally the same as in a bunch of developers sitting in a room going, well, we know how to play this game, but it's lack of QA, it's lack of someone then sitting there and going, right, but how do we convey that to our audience? And I think that's the part where this game falls down, and it's what you're really talking about when you zoom into it, because you're right, there is a lot of there is a lot of concepts. You could introduce all of the enemies we talked about slowly as you go on. So in the first few stages, you've got kind of some big arrows pointing you where to go. And then kind of, you maybe only have to deal with the mailboxes or whatever else, and a couple other things. And then as you go, they pick up, and there's more of them and other stuff like that. That, I think, would work more, but this is at a time when sophistication for game design wasn't focused there. People didn't necessarily look at tutorializing their early experience. It was very much kind of just chuck everything into the mix and go. And I think that's the issue.
I understand that to an extent, and it's definitely more developer oversight than anything. But the decisions still feel so baffling for 1992. I think enough standards had been set by that point. Ultimately, it just introduces too much, too early, and entirely without explanation. And I want to say it gets better with the minigames, but not really. So let's talk about them. We'll start with the most straightforward and possibly easiest minigame, and that's Bartman. So,
Really?
who wants...
Oh wow, I feel crushingly inadequate. It's like one of my bugbears was this one, because it just kept going
Okay,
and going
Steve,
and going and going.
Tell me about Bartman.
I mean, the game just throws you into the sky, and you've got a little slingshot, and you're like dodging lightning, poison clouds, everything in anything is trying to kill you. I think there's even missiles coming up from the ground, if memory serves.
It's like a side-scrolling shooter, isn't it?
Yeah, it's you've got I think you've got a reasonable range of motion. You can't backtrack, but you can move bar in like the 8 cardinal directions or something like that. But yeah, it's just incredibly stressful. There's some areas where it's just like a million projectiles you are going to get hit, and it just goes on and on and on and on. Like you have to fight. I'm pretty sure you have to fight the same boss like 2 or 3 times with Smithers and his bloody arrow blint. It's too long would be my main thing for this one. I don't know if you get 2 pages, because some I know give you 2. Like as a halfway checkpoint, so to speak, you get 1 page and another. But if it only gives you 1, I never saw it.
That, I believe, is one of the stages that only has 1 page that you get from it. And I mean, it is probably the most similar to Windy World because it has a lot of enemies and a lot of items that you can get. There's 3 bosses, technically. There's Sherry and Terry, which are in a air balloon. Barney, who's floating through the air with a pink elephant. You have Smithers, which is in a blimp. If you're lucky, you will only have to face Smithers once. And then obviously the final boss is Mr. Burns. And yeah, if you take him out, then you get the page, and you never have to play Bartman again. Sherwin, what did you think of Bartman?
It's a minigame. It feels kind of like just a ridiculous kind of... It's kind of like a weird, really budget version of R-Type.
That is
the
very
best way of describing
generous, can I just say?
Yeah, it's...
Well, you know what? I've got some friends who love R-Type. I'm going to say just play Bart's Nightmare and get to the blue door. You'll thank me.
Yeah, it's kind of, for what I've seen, it kind of feels, it's not. It's at least, I think, at least with this one, it's a straightforward thing. It feels fairly straightforward in terms of what you're doing. You're going from left to right. You are shooting things. And ultimately don't get hit, don't lose health. Seems very, very straightforward.
Yeah,
and that's the best thing I can say for it. It's very linear.
It's the one that you'd need like the least sort of insight
Onboarding.
to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but certainly there's some of these mini games where it's just baffling on the first try. Speaking of baffling, our next mini game, Bloodstream, has Bart killing grenade-tossing germs inside his own body. Okay, you ever dreamed about that? You ever dreamed about being in your own bloodstream like that?
I think when I watched Inner Space with, is it Dennis Quaid? Or whatever, for the 80s film, where a person gets shrunk down, goes inside a body, not themselves.
Oh, that's kind of a fun movie.
Yeah. But no, what I got from this was, it was the Discount Dig Dug with smiling Joe Fission constantly going, hello there, hello there, hello there. And it to the point where it's easy, but also my soul is forever altered.
I mean, I say this with full credit to the developers. I could not have dreamed of something as crazy as this minigame, in a bloody 100 years. On to, where to start with Bartzilla?
I feel like this one and the one possibly you're going to follow up with, which is where you are, or the follow-up of climbing the walls, climbing the building. I loved Rampage as a kid. I played a whole bunch of Rampage. So as a result, this is probably the thing where this was quite intuitive to me, but I can see how it might not be for somebody else. So possibly the wrong person to ask this question to.
I mean, the first half, it just feels like a complete mayhem simulator. I know vaguely of Rampage, but I thought it was more the bit at the end where you're climbing up the tower, which is just a tedium test. It's not too bad, you know, let's just keep pushing forward. But the initial bit is just blow stuff up. It's alright, it's cathartic, especially if you've done something stressful, like, you know, Bartman. But just blowing the living daylights out of Springfield, just walking along an endless corridor, shooting lasers and photon torpedoes that aren't photon torpedoes from your mouth. It's alright, it's just violence, which is sometimes pretty good. And then, yeah, climbing up the tower. I think you don't die until you literally get knocked all the way down to the bottom, do you? You just keep getting bumped down. At least that's what it felt like to me.
Yeah, that is hopelessly frustrating in some cases. I will throw it out there. That's a reoccurring theme in this game, is that there's lots of frustrating parts which don't always make immediately load of sense. So yeah.
That second segment is a little bit more forgiving at least, but honestly it took me ages to even get to it because the first phase is just so hard. This minigame uses all 8 face buttons, which I think is overkill for a premise this straightforward. So I feel like Bartzilla's like one visible health bar away from being decent. I like almost everything about the concept, but sometimes you just die from too many hits, and there's no real way of knowing how many hits it takes, so your mileage will probably vary with this one. So, minigame 4 is Indiana Bart, or the Temple of Maggie. Sherwin, could you explain this one to me? How does this one work?
Not in the slightest. This is utterly baffling to me. I couldn't tell you what's going on in this one. It's the honest thing. Like, it reminded me a lot of an old, I'm going to say it's a Square Enix game called Solstice for the NES. In the same way that it was just utterly baffling to me, like, what direction am I going in? What's the orientation of these things? Have I actually hit the devil? Did it just disappear? Like, what's going on with this? I failed on the game page on this one and just went, you know what, I don't want anything to do with this anymore. No.
It's like a very dangerous version of hopscotch, isn't it? So, I mean, it's Bart. He's dressed like Indiana Jones. He's in some ancient tomb. And the whole point is that you're jumping around a grid of stone platforms trying to reach the goal. You got booby traps, you got pitfalls, there's devils trying to knock you off, and all the while you're doing this, you're navigating this grid that occasionally requires a very specific path to proceed. Steve, your thoughts?
I mean, for a stage that's built around figuring out a puzzle, but also having instant death being such a prevalent problem, and it's random each time, right? There's no real set pattern.
I have seen guides that have tried to theorize the pattern, but I think you're right that there are certain sections which are ultimately randomized. I think there's certain sections which are fixed, like the opening section, there'll always be an egg on one particular row, so many squares in, but you get to a second part.
The worst roguelite experience. This is easily my least favourite minigame, and it's also the one that's had the most visual effort point to it, especially compared to Bartman, which is just like the clouds.
And you have to do it twice as well. This is a 2-pager. And if you don't like it the first time, you're certainly not going to like it the second time round because it's just the same gauntlet but harder. So, I mean, it's far too trial and error reliant, and I don't think at its core, it's just a very fun minigame. And finally, we get to the last minigame on our list. It's Itchy and Scratchy. Bart's got himself stuck in the world of Itchy and Scratchy and has to run around his house trying to kill them before they kill him. They actually did this exact same premise in the show for Treehouse of Horror years later, so that's pretty neat. But is this minigame any good?
It's the most obscurely peculiar formulation of a beat 'em up, considering they already had a template of the Konami games, and they could have rolled with that. And instead they went in its own truly terrible direction that I couldn't find any enjoyment with, which is a shame because they clearly tried a lot with. There's a lot of variety. It's just tedious.
Yeah, maybe. I must admit, this one I failed at pretty hard and went, yeah, this is what pushed me kind of to the point where I was like, I don't want to play this game anymore. Like this is like okay, I've got enough of this now. Like I've done Bartzilla, I've done Budstream, I've seen enough.
It was time to go home.
Yeah, this is what killed it for me. And that's possibly enough of a statement about it.
I think so. I mean, it's certainly not the worst of the bunch, but considering this minigame required 2 visits to Windy World to complete, it was really pushing it. So, if you're curious what you actually get for beating this game, and collecting all the pages, and going through all those minigames, you get a passing grade. And a high score screen. That's it. Is it worth it? No. Hell no. But it is an ending, and that's enough. Bart's Nightmare was the ghost of my gaming past, and revisiting it has neither exposed it as something shoddy and broken, nor validated it as some hidden genius. I still don't quite understand this game, but at the very least it is behind me and it is behind us. Guys, give me your closing thoughts on Bart's Nightmare.
Bart's Nightmare is definitely a novel in concept, and on paper it sounds amazing as a multitude of various minigames. But in execution, it's more a stress test of trying to push my patience to the limit. It needs better signposting. It could do with a lot more QA. And realistically, in this day and age, if you want a similar experience, just play one of the WarioWares. Although this and alongside Virtual Bart does lead me to believe that, you know, at some point the stars could have aligned and we could have had a proper contender against WarioWare in this kind of concept. And with that being said then, yeah, skip it.
I can very easily imagine how this game came about. Simpsons Mania hits, and this obviously would have been, I imagine, while Season 1, Season 2 of The Simpsons is happening, hence the initial bit where you're kind of saying all of the references are from early Simpsons, because at the point where they're animating 3 and 4 is the point where this game is in playtesting, production, that sort of stuff. So it's not likely to have been like something where they could affect anything new going forward. And I can imagine what basically happened was they sat around and, right, okay, cool, what are we going to do? Spitball some ideas around. Quick fire. What do we, what works? And then someone comes up with Bart's Nightmare. Okay, hear me out. We're going to have this. There'll be a series of smaller games that Bart does. He's running around trying to grab these pages, and then zooms into the page. We kind of give them, which way are you going to go, A or B or whatever. We give them these different tests, and then basically they're these crazy little wacky mini games where Bart's doing something else, like super abstract. You can throw loads of references in there. It'd be really, really cool, amazing. The Simpsons mega fan in the room sits there and goes, yeah, cool, I'll write down a whole bunch of ideas for stuff, and then basically that's it. And then team of coders and everything else sits there and goes, right, cool, let's make that happen. What then didn't happen is, I imagine there was a whole bunch of, right, we are running out of time. Okay, well, don't worry about put music in that section. It kind of works if you don't put music in there or whatever. Like, oh yeah, we've kind of, have we got time to play test this thing properly and to make sure it's not annoying or it's not irritating or whatever else. No, but it's okay because people are going to buy this thing. So it's got The Simpsons on the front of it, so that's fine too. The result is a game which conceptually is actually quite fun, and some of the elements of it push the envelope a bit and are kind of interesting, quite fun, quite cool. I like a lot of the concepting, fantastic. Reality is the execution is where it starts to fall down. Sound effects, not amazing. Audio, some of it's missing. Kind of some of the gameplay stuff, as you talked about, sheer volume of hazards thrown in at the go, not the best. All of these different things combine to mean that it's something where concept is brilliant, or at least very strong. Next part isn't. And ultimately that's what makes it really frustrating. It is the fact that it is a bit cryptic to interact with. And it is something where it's not amazing. But then for the age of games that this came out, and I'm obviously not meaning to talk down a lot of good games that came out then, but for a licensed game like The Simpsons, actually this isn't bad. This isn't a terrible game based on Simpsons games previous, and it's not a terrible game based on the other kind of games you were getting at the time. I remember a very similar time, a Batman game where Batman can get a gun and shoot criminals. The whole point of why Batman is Batman is that he doesn't like guns. Like stuff like that where people really miss the mark. So in the grand scheme of things, this actually feels reverent enough to the source material that I didn't think it was too egregious. I wouldn't race to go and play this game. I wouldn't recommend it to someone as like, oh, you've got to check this game out, it's really cool. But I do not have the same level of animosity towards it as what you or Steve did.
We have only 4 titles left on the wheel. We have MechWarrior 2 Mercenaries, Overblood, Shadow Man, and Croc. We're going to spin the wheel and find out what we're covering next. And the next game that we'll be covering is Croc for the PS1.
Cool. No, that's a game I haven't thought about for 1,000 years. That's kind of fun.
It's a game that I haven't thought about in at least 4 years. I can't wait. And if you can't wait to check out our next episode, why not go on over to patreon.com/FASprayPod to learn about all the goodies the First Aid Spray podcast has been cooking. Thank you very much for joining us once again on this stroll down memory card lane. We've been Jordan, Steve, and Sherwin. So until next time, see ya!
Bye!
Bye.